get started with today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not to substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. You should always speak with your physician or other healthcare professionals before doing any fasting, changing your diet in any way, taking or adjusting any medications or supplements, or adopting any treatment plan for a health problem. The use of any other products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Any information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. All right, and now we'll get started with today's episode.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Nadia Patiguana, and welcome to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. So today, instead of being joined by my two incredible co-hosts, Megan and Terry, I have a very, very special guest. And even though she said to me that she wasn't feeling her best, she still wanted to come in and share her wonderful story with you all. So we're going to get a little bit into that. But my coaching client, Rho, actually volunteered to do this podcast with me. I was mentioning to a group of people that I really wanted to, on my next solo podcast episode, I really wanted to talk with some of our members and some of our clients to share their amazing stories, because I'm always just amazed by the people that I get to work with and I get to learn from. Rho went on this wonderful trip that maybe she'll tell us a little bit about. And then, of course, all the flying overseas and everything, you know, she caught a little bug, which I can totally relate to because my kids and I, Rho, I think I didn't even tell you this, but my kids and I had the flu last week and it was just horrendous. But anyway, I'm looking at her right now. She looks amazing, sounds fine, but maybe doesn't feel great. So I really wanted to say hi and thank you so much for still wanting to go ahead with this. I know you were very excited to go ahead of this and to share some things with our listeners. And I'll tell you one thing I thought was very amazing of you wanting to share the story. Sometimes I feel like in the past, that's why this time I said, you know what, guys, I really want one of you to volunteer, any one of you that has worked with me and wants to talk with me on our podcast and have people learn a bit from you, right? Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn from each other. I wanted somebody to volunteer. And the reason being is in the past, sometimes I have found that somebody's story is amazing and I want to share it. And then they don't want to share because they feel like, oh, I haven't yet reached whatever goal. And I thought it was amazing how quickly you jumped at this opportunity. And that's because you have some great things to share with people, right? So first and foremost, you're going to properly introduce yourself. I'm just going to let you tell us a little bit about you. And then I'm going to ask you some questions if you don't mind.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be working with you as my coach for the last 3 months. My journey started actually with the fasting method last year. I've been carrying excess weight since about 2010, and I've tried several things, including Weight Watchers multiple times. And when I finally kind of connected with the fasting method, that was in about May or June of last year. I knew enough from what I had learned from the books and listening to some of the podcasts. I had a lot of information, and I went in and I was able to do a lot of what the suggestions were. Physically, eating wise, mentally, emotionally, I was on track until September. And this is where the story gets kind of interesting. I need to back up just a minute and explain that I grew up in a alcoholic home. Both parents were alcoholics. I never had a weight issue, I think because I was so stressed out. I was an only child. And so food wasn't an issue in terms of overeating. I always knew that I was one of those people that when I was stressed, I couldn't eat. So fast forward to September of last year. Long story short, I had been estranged from my parents for a while. And in September, I found out that my mother had passed away, but she had passed away in April of 2018. And that threw me into a tailspin that I wasn't ready to deal with. I went back to comfort food eating, which I had started in 2010. That's how my coping mechanisms were. And so I like, okay, I'm going to give myself 3 days just to eat what I want to deal with this. And then 3 days became a week, and a week became a month. And pretty soon I'm into 3 months. I realized this isn't working. This is not what I want to do. All the weight I had lost, I gained back. And so in January, I decided to try Megan's Masterclass. And I went in there, and that was helpful because I had all this information, but I was overwhelmed by it, plus the emotional component of my journey. So I took her masterclass, and then in doing that, that helped me to kind of get back on track, but I felt I needed the extra help. And so then in February, that's when I reached out to you and I said, okay, I need some one-on-one coaching because I have all this information. I've got all this emotional turmoil going on, and I don't know how to put this all together to be successful. So that's when I reached out to you.
Wow, that was a really great intro, by the way. My questions, and I don't know that I actually knew that much detail about your childhood.
Yeah.
Because we got right into coaching. You were ready and you were like a sponge. Mm-hmm. And I think you liked my step-by-step approach, even though you had a lot of experience with fasting. And I think it just clicked, right? But okay, yes. Let's take a step back.
Sure.
And then in this, I'm sure you're going to share, whatever you feel pertinent, and I think you're very clear on what you want to share with our listeners and friends. So when did you first hear about fasting? This is what I want to know. These are my few questions. How and when did you first hear about fasting?
Okay, I have a friend. I used to live in California. I don't live there now. I have a very good friend who actually introduced me to Jason Fung and the fasting method probably in 2017, 2018. She told me to get the obesity code. I read the book. I wasn't ready for it, but I did read the book, and then I just started to go in. I just jumped into it. And I remember one day felt really awful, and she went on to Facebook and checked, like, what do you do when they feel awful? And they said, oh, she needs salt. So in the beginning, I was just trying to wing it. And when that didn't work, that's when I switched over to Weight Watchers. When I came back to it was last year, my husband and I, we were driving down to Phoenix, which is about a 2-hour drive for us. And we were listening a lot to Dr. Peter Attia, and he did an interview with Dr. Jason Fung, and we listened to that. That's when everything clicked for me. It was that interview, and I'm like, okay, now this makes sense. Now I understand how insulin resistance is working, what it's doing to my body. And so that's when I really jumped in and felt like that was when I really got started. I was ready for it. And I had a better understanding of not just I want to lose weight, but what is going on in my body that's contributing to all these symptoms that I have.
Okay, that was my next question. So once you learned about fasting and you had some tools, right? You read the book, this interview with Dr. Peter and Dr. Jason Fung also, and I think that sounds very familiar to a lot of the stories I've heard. Like when I tell my husband's story, right? How he did his first ever fast, a 12-day fast. Mm-hmm. It was actually from watching a YouTube video by Jason Fung, right? Even though I already worked with Jason, we were already doing, low carb and I think TRE pretty much at the time, but he watched one Jason Fung video and he was like, it all made sense. And his very first fast was a 12-day fast. So I think Jason that's really Jason's gift, is he really does capture people in a way. And so I highly encourage people to kind of follow what you did, to read at least the obesity code. I think once you read that, you want to read all the other books, but at least the obesity code. And I think listening to a few interviews, I really do think you have to understand this and be ready before you can take full advantage. But my next follow-up question was, okay, so you heard about fasting, learned about fasting. What was your initial goal? Was it weight loss or something else?
Completely weight loss. Completely. I understood the insulin resistant component. My friend told me back in, the friend who helped me originally, that she suspected I had it. But it was completely weight loss. And I know you suggest that we make our why. My why was I want to lose weight.
Okay. And was that a strong enough why for you at the time that it actually motivated you enough to at least the first part of your journey?
Yes, it was enough because there wasn't a lot of emotional component in my life. Just my life was pretty much going status quo, which was good. It's a good life. But yeah, there was no extra stress coming in. So up until September, when I got the news, I was going very well with it. Up to that point, I had lost 24 pounds.
Okay. So my next question was, okay, so tell us on your own, because there's a lot of folks out there that are trying to do this on their own, and you were very successful. So tell us on your own, if you could summarize or give a bit of detail, what were you doing? What was your plan? What was your fasting schedule? What was your dietary plan?
I went low carb immediately because I understood, again, believing I was insulin resistant, what the carbs were doing and the sugar. I also can sometimes have issues with wine, so I cut out all the alcohol. And I started 16-8, and then I went 18-6, and then I went 24. And then I started doing multiple day fasts. Now, when I was younger in high school, I didn't need to lose weight, but I would do fasting for spiritual reasons. And so I had done 3-day fasts when I was younger, just on my own. So I moved into the 3-day fast, and that went so well. And then I started moving into 4 days. And then I actually did a 5-day. I tried to go for a 5-day, and I made it like 2 hours short of the 5-day, and it was working. I was losing a lot of weight, and I was able to maintain the schedule, and I didn't feel deprived or anything. I was staying very focused in that.
Okay. Now the hard part, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you told us a little bit. Why did you eventually feel like, and I know, again, you're going to a little bit of repetition, but why do you think that there are so many people out there that are having a hard time doing this on their own, even though they might have all of the relevant information? I know Terry and I have had a few conversations about this as well. Why some people can do it on their own, why some people need more accountability, why some people might find help with the community support, and some people might find help with coaching. Let's talk about that a little bit. And then we'll talk a little bit about the future.
Okay. Well, let me share with you that as a result of my childhood and the environment I grew up in, and there was a lot of abuse in that environment, I've had 16 years of therapy. So I have a lot of tools already. So I think going into the fasting, there was no stress in my life. I had the information. I could stick to the program that I was creating that I thought was what you guys were saying. I've learned differently now that I'm working with you. But what I wasn't prepared for was the emotional component. And even though I've had all this therapy, I hadn't seen my mother since 2012. We had been estranged. I had always hoped something would work, that we could get that resolved. So when here it is in 2018, I learned she had died 4.5 years later. I had no mental file for that. I had no tools for that. It was like a tsunami coming over me, because not only have I lost a parent, but all the hope that I had had that we could someday reconcile, that this estrangement could be resolved, was completely wiped out. So it was not only grief from losing a parent, but grief from losing the hope that this was never going to be resolved, that this was the way it ended. So to your question, I can understand what you guys are saying and how you set up the programs. I was not prepared for the emotional component, which I think takes me back to 2010, which is where things shifted. And I became an emotional eater as opposed to a person who was under stress and couldn't eat. That was probably why I was so skinny for so long. So along with menopause, and I had to go on antidepressants. So a lot of things happened in 2010 that kind of created the shift in my thinking and my emotional being, that I then hadn't dealt with parts of that, which came up last September, which is why I then went off track. It was the emotional component I didn't have the tools for in this realm.
I'm actually flattered that you say that, because I always say that, I consider myself a pretty good coach, right? I'm really great with the tips and tricks, and I always have a solution, right? I always have a solution at the tip of my tongue. But I always say that if there's one thing that I'm lacking is, and I'm working on, right? Because we're all working on ourselves here to become a better version of ourselves, of course. And luckily, within our program, we have Coach Terry, right? Dr. Terry Vance, who has all these amazing skills and does all these masterclasses that I've personally done myself. And through that, I do think I've become a better coach, but I really still think that I lack the skills, because I'm not a therapist, to help people with those life stresses and emotional component of life. But you're saying differently. I'm actually surprised to hear you say that. You're saying that somehow miraculously, working together, you found that is not helped necessarily with your stresses and emotional components, but sort of how to deal with that when it comes to your food and fasting. So you don't have to answer that, but I mean, I'm flattered. But the other question that I have for you is, okay, so you had a lot of success on your own before coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I want people to hear, because I would definitely want to encourage people to, whether you can afford this or not, whether you're somebody who thinks a coaching program would work for you or not, we do have a lot of resources, and we have this wonderful community that can definitely hold hands and help each other do this on their, not alone, because we're still there. But I heard you say that even though you had a lot of success on your own and you did the TRE, right? And then you did the alternate day. It's like, how I love step-by-step things. I'm always telling people, don't skip steps, blah, blah, blah. It sounded like you did that on your own. But then I also heard you say that when you started coaching, that you learned a few things and you tweaked a few things. You want to share some of those bits?
Sure. I had a lot of information, and I kind of, in some ways, I didn't know what I knew, and I didn't know what I didn't know, so I'm doing it on my own. And then I start working with you, and from day one, you're like, let's build a foundation. And I'm like, oh, what a concept. I knew that that's a good thing to do, but that's something I hadn't done on my own, build the foundation. And so you started to lay out your plan for me, and like even your 5 pillars, you took all this information and you laid it out in a plan in an order that I understood. And by building that foundation, I think the first thing you had me start with was 2 meals one day, 1 meal the next day, but you still called that a fasting day with 1 meal. And I don't share that to confuse people, but I had not come across that anywhere. And so you gave me direction, and then you said, let's build this. And then when you get to the next point, we'll go to the next step. So that part built really quick for me. And then I think the next thing we went to was alternate day fasting. And so what you helped me do was take all this information and put it in order in a way that we could build a foundation. Had I had this foundation back in September, I probably wouldn't have gotten off track as fast. I was just doing on my own, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of the tsunami, and I don't know what to go back to. I'm just, I'm certainly not going to go do a 5-day. So I didn't know what to fall back on. And what you helped me do is you helped me design a program and build a foundation so that, that I even if I go off track, I know where I'm supposed to be. So that was the biggest thing you did, was you just helped consolidate the information and put it in an order that I understand what the order of importance was, and how do we build a plan and a foundation that I could then be successful. And if I get off track, I know where I need to go back to.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I'm really glad because that is exactly what I would like to do when I work with people. That's exactly what I would like people to feel, is that they feel empowered. And I do talk about this all the time. I'm very repetitive, which I think is important. And I've learned from really great educators that's really important, whether you're working with children or adults. It'd probably be more important when you're working with adults, right? Because kids probably absorb things quicker, but even children need repetition. And certainly adults need repetition. And sometimes we think that if you're not repetitive and if you don't make things really simple, that people feel offended. But really, I think it's the opposite, right?
Yes.
And every time I say it, I tell people, if you're annoyed with my repetition, good. I'm happy, because it means that it's become part of your toolbox. It's become second nature. It's become something that makes sense. So I'm really glad that you felt that.
You never know. You can say the same thing over and over, and you never know when that one time is going to happen that it's going to get in. And sometimes you may just word it a little differently and it gets in. But I used to teach archery, and I completely understand the repetition part. And you never know when it's going to click, when it's going to sink in. And so you need to do that. So you shared that you were very upfront with me in the beginning, and I'm like, I completely understand. And I appreciate that you do. It doesn't annoy me.
Well, there's another thing I didn't know about you, that you used to teach archery.
I actually used to compete. I competed for about 10 years and I was very successful on the state and national level. And I even have won world championship. So that's something else you didn't know about me.
Well, you see, and I boast, right? A lot about my clients because I'm like, we work with these amazing people. We work with these people that come to us and say, I am a world-class this or that. I am, I have 10 kids, which is amazing to me. That somebody could, yes. I have 2 and I'm dying, right? I am the CEO of this company. I am, and then they say, I am such a strong person, right? And I can do it all. But for whatever reason, I cannot do this. And, I'm honored to work with these people because these are today we were having a meeting in our community. I don't know if you're in the community meetings today. And I was talking to somebody and he's pretty new to this, right? Pretty new to the community, doesn't know how I am, my very direct, tough love sort of approach that people have, grown to recognize. Empathetic nonetheless, I think by the end of today, I hope that he walked away with that feeling. But, his response right away, right? His defensive when I started to talk and say the same things that I said to you, Rho, were, well, I'm an engineer. Yes. No shocker, Most of the people, I would say all the people that we work with are these even people. You have never bragged about anything, Rho. I don't know. It's never come up. It's always been very on point with you. So having said all that, I know that you have some things to share. And now that I've asked my questions and we've done a great job, I think of sort of introducing you, I really want to know, why did you want to do this so much? What is it that you want to share with people? Go ahead and share. Let me know, because I didn't ask you this before on purpose. Why did you want to do this podcast with me today?
There was a couple of reasons. And even when I wrote to you and said I wanted to do it, there are a lot of people in the community that have a lot more health issues than I do and have come through a lot more than I have. I'm dealing with insulin resistance and obesity, and I don't have a lot of other things, which I'm thankful for. And I'm thinking, well, Nadia, she can certainly get somebody which got a much more powerful story, and they've had a lot more success. I'm still in the middle of my coaching with you. But you know what? I opened up one day in one of the groups. I can't remember. I think it was with Coach Lisa in the book club. And somebody had shared that they had begun to realize that they were punishing themselves by overeating. And there's a long story, which I won't go into, but it resonated with me. And it's the first time I ever opened up in a group and said, oh my, I think that's part of what I've done too, with the issues with my parents and my mother. And I still haven't fully processed it, but it resonated. And after I shared, there were several people in that group that thanked me for sharing and opening up and being vulnerable. I was in tears when this was all coming to the surface. And I realized, you know what, maybe my story isn't as dramatic as some of the other clients you've worked with, but what I shared resonated with people. And I think because of the response I got back, I went, everybody's got different stories. And maybe there's somebody out there like me who, doesn't have all the health issues, but maybe has, I'm dealing with these specific things. And I'm hoping that by sharing with you, I can be encouraging to other people. One of the things I really would like people to understand when you were discussing, you have a client who's an engineer, and I've shared with you some of my success. It's not that we're not capable. We are capable people, but it doesn't mean that being capable, it doesn't mean you don't need help. And that sometimes you don't need someone to guide you down the path. And I've relied on myself for a long time. And I think that that's why I did as well as I did on my own. But a time came when I'm like, I need help. And I think that's the biggest thing, that if somebody's out there and they're questioning, should I get a coach? Or I would say minimal, join the community if you're unsure, because there is a lot of resources. Then you have the different levels of coaching. You could do group coaching. I chose to do individual for my reasons, but that doesn't mean I'm a failure. That doesn't mean I'm not incapable. It just means I got to a point where I could no longer do it on my own. And that's what I hope people can understand, is that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to struggle. Just don't stay there. If you're there and you need the help, reach out in one way or another and get that, because I found the community to be very supportive. I haven't been involved on the boards as much as I'd like due to some of the things, in my trip I just had. But I'm hoping now that I'm home and my life's going to get a little more regular that I can get back and participate. But the support is there. You're not a failure for asking for help. You guys want us to succeed, and the community wants you to succeed. So that's what's been very encouraging for me.
That's a big message because I agree with you. I think that the more capable people are, the less likely they are to feel comfortable to ask for help. And I think that that is across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's not just from a dietary perspective. I think that's probably true in a lot of other things in life. So I think a lot of people needed to hear that today, Rho. Thank you.
You're welcome
for saying that. Okay, so some fun things now. Share with us some of your NSVs, non-scale victories, and scale victories if you'd like. And then we'll talk a little bit about your trip, which I think was super fun.
Okay. Well, non-scale victories, I know this is a little personal, but I shared with you before I left. Let's just say I reached a point one day where my chest, I no longer felt it resting on my stomach. That was like a big one for me. I was sitting there and I'm like, hey, this feels different. It's like my stomach has shrunk enough that it doesn't need to support my chest anymore. So that's been one of them. Honestly, a non-scale victory, it goes back to me reaching out in the beginning and asking you for help. That was probably one of my biggest because I had been so determined to do it on my own. So just asking for help. The other thing is you helped me. I get obsessed with the numbers on the scale. So you said just weigh yourself on Fridays. And that's one thing I do. And I'm now working on not letting my identity be connected to a number. And in fact, you and I have discussed, and we've now gone to the hip to weight ratio. And I'm like, okay, that's where I don't want to say I'm going to measure my success, but that's where I'm going to measure my process. How am I doing? So you've already helped me do some mind shifts as I've become aware of where I'm, what am I focusing on? What do I think is success and what is truly success? So those are some of my non-scale victories. And then what did you ask me? There was something else, another victory.
Well, I said any non-scale victories because that's what we like to celebrate. And if you'd like to share scale victories, that's okay too. I think most people either weigh themselves too much or if they really have some issues and just a tough relationship with the scale, I'd rather they don't weigh at all. So we do have all these other methods to measure. You and I have been using, I think you're using one of the smart tapes, right, to measure?
Well, I'm using the Renfo app. The smart tape I got didn't work, but I'm doing measurements once a month, and then I'm doing the scale once a week on Fridays.
I'm glad that you're doing the measurements for sure, because, we cannot let the scale determine our progress or our value. And I think that that's something that unfortunately has been so ingrained in people since they were young, right? This is so much more about body composition. So this is something that we talk quite a bit about because you do have a body composition scale. So it's important to look at. I do remember you and I going over some numbers, some fun numbers, and really how to measure properly for the waist to hip ratio, because I was actually shocked that some of these wonderful devices were actually teaching people to measure incorrectly. And so you're not going to get the proper ratio by doing it that way. And we really do need the proper ratio, right? To reach our health goals. So what I said was NSVs and scale victories, if you'd like. You shared with us that on your own, you'd lost some weight. You and I have only been working together for 3 months. But if you'd like to share your scale victories, and most importantly, then this amazing trip that you just went on and came back from. And I really don't think that this trip would have been possible had you not decided to really invest in your health journey.
Yeah, well, so I will share that I did weigh myself before I left. And I weighed myself when I got back, which wasn't on Friday. And I did gain 3 pounds, but I'm not surprised. We can talk about that. So I've currently lost about 10 pounds since I've been working with you. But my trip was to Spain. And when I first started working with you, I said, hey, this is coming up, so we're going to have to work around this. But in 2014, I saw the movie The Way, which is about the Camino in Spain that one takes. The whole journey, it can be different distances, but the whole journey in the movie was from France to Santiago, Spain. And I had always wanted to do that pilgrimage. And so I had an opportunity this year to not start in France. I actually started in Sarria and we went to Santiago. It was an 8-day pilgrimage walking. It was a total of 70 miles. And it's the closest place that you can walk to Santiago and still get a credential. So the credential, you get stamps along the way at different places. And then you reach Santiago and you can turn it in and you get this credential that says you've done this. And this is a medieval pilgrimage. This has been going on for 1,000 years. So I was hoping I would have lost more weight before I left, but 10 pounds, that's better than being 10 pounds over. That's hard to explain. If you see the movie, you get a better understanding. But I'm walking a medieval trail now. There are sometimes you walk through towns, so there's more support, but sometimes you walk through, pastures and meadows and forests and farmland. Sometimes you walk through small villages. Sometimes you have cafes and bars along the way, but you may go a mile or two before you see one. But for me, the intention was a spiritual journey. So when you and I had a meeting about a week before I left, and we had a plan for the food. And I'm happy to say that my successes were I didn't snack and I ate before the sun went down. But in Spain right now, the sun's going down at 10. So, we discussed no fasting. We discussed time restricted eating. And I found very quickly that didn't work for me because I could be walking, anywhere from 5 to 7 to 8 hours a day. At one point, I was trying fat fasting for breakfast, like bacon and eggs. And then I would do a meal at lunch. And then a lot of times dinner ended up being the biggest meal, which doesn't even start until 7. So I had your voice in my head. I knew what the best options were, but the reality didn't always play out. So I finally just kind of had to let it go. I need to listen to my body and adjust accordingly on the days and the lengths of the walks. I will say that it was the most physically demanding thing I have ever done. And I had researched this. I had friends who've done it, albeit they started in France and not in Sarria. But it was an intense journey. My feet were not 100% when I went over. And so I was never sure, were they going to last? But, I had 7 miles of walking some days. My last 2 days, I had a 12, over 12 and over 11. I had hiking poles, thankfully, because I wouldn't have made it the last 2 days uphill if I hadn't had the poles. For those of us who love to spend time contemplating or reflecting or personal growth, I have come away, I have a list, and it's going to take me a while to process this because a lot of things happened in a very short period of time. But starting out with some conflicts within the group I was in, and then just doing something that gets you to the point of physical exhaustion. Plus, I didn't carry everything on my back like some people do. I had a small suitcase, but even then I didn't have a lot of stuff. But you start in that journey, you start to see what's really important. Like I'll share that Coach Terry might like this. I had a lot of stuff in my pack day one, all the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? So my first day, it was a day pack, but it was stuffed. By the end of the day, I'm like, I cannot carry this 7 more days. I need to take out. So then it became out, okay, what is essential? And I'm letting go of all this stuff, but I'm realizing, I have mental what ifs. I carry the burden of mental what ifs. Now I'm starting to feel the weight of those. So that was just day one. Now there was a what if that was practical. I carried a rain poncho. And now the what if it rains is practical. You need the poncho. But I didn't need all the other items I had for all the other scenarios that may or may not happen. So like I said, that was day one. And it was just like each day, powerful, powerful lessons. And by the end of the trip, all my energy is focused in walking and I'm going up big hills and it's beautiful. Let me share you one other realization is day 3 I was in a lot of pain and I'm looking around and there's all this beauty. I'm surrounded by these rolling green hills and ancient forests and I'm going through them and I'm in pain, but I'm realizing I could see the beauty through the pain, which that was a huge revelation. by the end of the journey, and this is something I've only shared with a very few people, and I don't want it to sound esoteric, but by the end of the journey, I could actually look back at my childhood and my past and all the issues that happened, and I could begin to see the beauty that came out of that. And I'm not saying not to self-inflict pain to get to beauty, but my perspective shift, and I started to realize there can be beauty in pain. So it was a very physical journey. It was a very emotional journey. It was a very spiritual journey. I came away with a lot more that I'm still processing. But when you get to the point of physical exhaustion and you're still pressing forward, like I was still pressing forward to get to the cathedral, there's a clarity that comes with that I've never experienced before. And it's what is really important, and in what is really important, what am I, what is the extra baggage I'm carrying? As drama is going around me, I don't have the physical energy. And all of a sudden I got to a place of acceptance. I'm just like, I'm just going to let this be because I don't have the physical energy to get caught up in it. But then there came a piece that was just like, it's okay to let it be. I don't have to fight. I don't have to police. I don't have to, is this person telling the truth or not? I didn't have to do any of it. It was just like, I can just, at that point, it was about me and God and the journey. And so it's a very condensed version of 8 very intense days, but it was amazing. And the other thing in there in relation to food, I'm going to be very curious. I've been sick since I got home, so I haven't gotten back on track with food. And we have a session tomorrow, and I look forward to that because when you're out there, you can only eat what's there. It's like I might be craving something like I want a ribeye, but yeah, if it's not an option, So even then, the simplicity of the food, I realized it doesn't have to be hard. I can make choices that are healthy and good for me and be okay with that. So it'll be interesting when we get back on to a plan to see how this whole experience is now going to be incorporated into my fasting and time restricted eating.
All right. Well, there's definitely beauty, not in pain necessarily, but in growth. And
there you go.
It sounds like,
yes.
It sounds like this trip was worth every single mile.
Yeah.
And you're home and not feeling the greatest, which is really, I don't know if you remember this, but before you went away, you wanted a plan for your trip, which most people ask for a plan for their trip. But I usually say, regardless of how well things turn out, right? Regardless if your plan goes perfectly or not, we are not going to harp on it, right? What we want, once you come back from your trip, what we want, and we do want to have a plan. We want to make the best choices that we can. We want to feel good. And it sounds like you did really well. I forget exactly what you said. And again, we're not over focusing on the scale, but it sounds like
3 pounds up, but that's okay.
Well, there's a lot to this, right? There's a lot. There's the insulin stacking, there's the inflammation, there's the being sick, right? Increases your insulin.
And even over there, there's the jet lag, there's the sleeping, there's the pushing my body to an extent I never have before. So there's the stress. So there's
the whole 5 pillars, right?
Exactly. All going on over there. And then I come home and I'm adjusting. It's all going on over here too.
That's right. So you brought the insulin beast back with you. I love to joke. When people come back from a trip, I always say, oh, so you brought the insulin beast back with you. But I have to tell you that besides, of course, the beauty of the journey, the personal journey that you've just been on, the reason why I think that this is really important in our coaching journey together is because I always like the opportunity. You shared that you went through some emotional and stressful things just before we started coaching, and you wanted my help, right? You wanted a coach to help you cope with that and get back on track. I always like during the healing phase of the journey, when I'm working with somebody, it's always an extra bonus. Not that I wish any ill upon anyone, but it's important that life gets in the way so that I have the opportunity, and life will always get in the way for good reasons, for bad reasons, and in between reasons, right? Because that's how life is. Life is nice and curvy, as I say, and we got to learn how to surf and ride the waves. But I love the opportunity to teach people how to implement a holding pattern, which you talked a little bit about when necessary, right? How to hang in there when life gets in the way. And it's always about what you can learn from that, not to harp on it, but it's always an opportunity to help us implement what I call a recovery plan. And I have a blog post about this, right? And how not to feed the insulin beast and how to tame the insulin beast after a trip or after a stressful event. So I am looking forward to tomorrow's session.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to our recovery plan together. I'm also looking forward to, of course, you feeling better.
Yes.
I really appreciate you giving me that update. That means that tomorrow we can focus on getting
on the plan back.
Our recovery plan. I am all about, as I joked at the beginning, there's always a solution. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I really appreciate everything that you shared with us, but we still got some time. And if there's anything else you'd like to share, or you feel like you wanted to share with our listeners and friends that I maybe didn't ask or didn't have a chance to, go ahead.
I've pretty much already said it at the last one. It's just, you've helped me redefine what success is. You've helped me to build that foundation. Keep in mind that reaching out and asking for help doesn't mean you're a failure. You can be very capable people and you can still need help, but you guys are here for us. I mean, we're paying you, but you're here for us and you're here to help us. And you guys want us to succeed as much as we want to succeed. And I think the other thing that you guys are so valuable at is we can get in our own way. I'm learning that from the book club. I'm learning that from listening to Coach Terry, that there's so much that can be going on an emotional level for your eating or your overeating. And it's just, you guys are here to help us understand ourselves better so that we can, if, we are kind of our own worst enemy at this point, how can we move beyond that? How can we deal with it and move beyond it so that we can succeed? And that's what I think you guys have been so good at from what I've seen with other people. And I'm in the journey now is succeeding to find that success and to learn to live comfortably within that success. I will share that my whys have changed since I just want to lose weight. I want to be healthy. I want to lose weight, but I also want to have a healthy body. And this trip was so powerful for me that I want to go back. And I'm actually looking at the Portugal Camino next year. And I was like, okay, this is giving me another new why, because I don't want to be carrying an extra 30 or 40 pounds that is that hard on my body. So yes, there's a weight loss component, but I want to be healthy and be able to be active and do these things for another 20 years.
That was so beautiful. You are such a great speaker, Rho.
Thank you.
And so easy to listen to. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I didn't ask any of these questions before. When you volunteered, I'm so glad that I just said yes right away. I think it's really great that we have these intake sessions, these free intake sessions before we start coaching, because we get to know each other a little bit. We only have It's like speed dating, right? We only have about 15 minutes to get to know each other.
Right.
But definitely got an opportunity to sort of feel if we would work well together. And I definitely think that we have. And I'm looking forward, we're only halfway through, right? And I'm definitely looking forward to the other half of our journey together. And maybe we'll have you back here then, because after listening to you today, I have a feeling you'll have a lot more to share. So thank you again for your generosity and your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. Have a great week. We'll be back next week. Happy fasting, everyone. Bye.